Thank you for joining us on this inaugural episode of Hill International's Insights and Expertise podcast. This is Chris Miller from Hill, and I'll be running our discussion today on coding for recovery. For any listeners not familiar with Hill, we are a program, project, and construction management firm headquartered in Philadelphia, and our more than 3,000 professionals manage and support construction projects around the world. Today we're covering a topic that's increasingly in the news: disasters, both natural and man-made. Specifically, we'll be talking with two experts in the field on how to both build to recover from disasters and to minimize the impacts of disasters, and how a new innovation in project management information systems, or PMIS, can help rebuild communities more quickly and keep control of these challenging but all too common construction programs and projects. First, I'd like to introduce our experts. We have Andy Robinson from Hill, who is the company's Vice President of Resiliency and Disaster Recovery, and Mark Della Volpe, Managing Director at IAF Consulting. Both Andy and Mark are recovery veterans, having helped communities rebuild from hurricanes, floods, and other disasters. Andy, let's begin with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, your approach to recovery, and the work you're currently doing at Hill?
Sure. So my background, it's been over 30 years working with programs and projects funded by FEMA, HUD, and others in recovery of disasters. I assumed a leadership role for Road Home as executive director of the program management office in recovery for Katrina, and then worked in New Jersey with Superstorm Sandy, Virgin Islands, and some housing projects, and now oversee Hill's practice for resiliency and disaster recovery internationally. My approach, which I think is somewhat unique to Hill as well, is we have a very sophisticated portfolio and program and construction management approach. We do this work internationally. We build some of the largest buildings, some of the largest projects and infrastructure projects all around the world. And obviously to do that, it takes a great deal of sophistication around program management information systems and simply being able to respond to the needs of the project on a daily basis and adapt to that. We use a program management approach to do that, and we can do that across an entire portfolio of disaster projects. Makes us a little bit unique, and we're going to talk about some of the tools today that we bring to that practice.
Thanks, Andy. I'm curious, personally, how did disasters and PMO come together in your career? Was it natural? In doing this work, did you just say, PMO is the right method for these recovery jobs?
So sure, this concept was born out of necessity. From our approach down at Katrina on the Road Home program, it became obvious that this is going to be one of the largest projects that anyone had ever attempted in disaster recovery. And we looked around for other examples out there, and it was clear that program management concepts and basically the PMBOK, which is the PMI body of knowledge, practices from the PMI Institute, needed to be employed in order to manage something of such massive scale in terms of number of projects, amount of data that had to be collected, and just the sheer size and scale of it. So we use that as our guidebook in putting together a project of that size.
Got it. Thanks. Mark, let's talk a little bit about your background and your work at IAF Consulting. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us about your career.
Sure, absolutely. I actually came into the disaster space from the finance side. So I was in investment banking in New Orleans post-Katrina, and there was a need for some finance and data professionals to help with the city's recovery. So that's how I got into this space, and that's really one of the interesting parts about disaster recovery in general, is that it brings together a variety of disciplines. You have engineering, accounting, policy. Andy comes from the systems and project management side, and our paths crossed a number of years ago on a project. I've been with IAF since it started in 2013. We're a management consulting firm. We do software and data management solutions for the public sector and work with a variety of city, state, and local governments across the U.S. we have kind of found a calling in the disaster space because when it comes to data management, it's somewhat of a holy grail. It has very big, data sets, vast timelines, constantly changing requirements, and so it really has it all.
Thanks, Mark. That makes sense. Between Andy and Mark, I think we definitely have the right experts to talk to. And specifically, what I'd like to talk to you about today is an article that the two of you wrote together called How a PMO Can Deploy a Low-Code PMS Solution to Drive Results and Maximize Grant Funding. Now, that's a lot of acronyms. So let's just start with a little bit of definitions and some groundwork. Andy, you talked about a PMO already. Can you define what a project management office is, a program management office, depending on the case, and specifically what they do?
Yes. Think about a very large endeavor of any type. It takes multiple projects to make that happen, whether it's the building of a battleship, it's the construction of a bridge, it's the deployment of some large government grant program. There's multiple projects. Let me give you an example of a project inside some of those. You might need to set up a CRM. You might need to set up a data center. You might need to train people en masse. So these projects can be put together and coordinated, and coordination is oftentimes a requirement with any large project or program. And they're done so through the communication systems and methodology of a project management office or PMO. Without it, these are simply small projects operating independently and most likely really not achieving the goals of the organization without that coordination being provided by the PMO in a cohesive and a holistic manner.
Thanks. That makes perfect sense. I was thinking as you said that about cohesion and bringing everything together and all the efficiencies that can be realized there. Mark, IAF is a leader in the PMIS space. Could you tell us a little bit more about what a PMIS is and what specifically it does on a recovery program?
Sure. Yeah. PMIS is a broad term. I mean, simply put, it's really just a tool or a system that you use to manage the moving parts of a project. Large-scale disasters really need quick and robust systems to handle a variety of data sets and compliance requirements. So there are some common functions of a PMIS. You think about scheduling, you think about cost control, reporting, integration. And by their nature, these PMIS systems tend to be pretty static. They require large, upfront resources and time to get them moving and up to their full capacity. And so these are some of the constraints that can put projects off track and miss opportunities and miss milestones. So this kind of lends to this low-code approach that we've talked about that we can use to augment or even replace some traditional PMIS tools and give some more flexibility and even capability.
Got it. So the PMO, which is Andy and Hill, will use a PMIS, probably one developed by IF, and they're going to track, monitor, coordinate, and they're going to inform those decision makers and keep those stakeholders all on board. Now, I've used a PMIS before, so I know the functionality is so, the critical thing of that PMIS is its reporting abilities. Andy, could you explain a little bit about those abilities?
Sure. And reporting in this instance is key to keeping your stakeholders informed and also key to understanding the progress of your projects and programs and overall portfolio performance. And then identifying where the problem areas are and then taking corrective action to amend those. Without this, I would submit to you, you're just simply lost. If you do not have this going on in any disaster recovery project or program, you are lost. So there has to be a connection between the processes, the organization, which supports the policy, and then all the key process indicators that you would then set up to measure, and then the reporting. And that's sort of the the value chain, if you will, from policy all the way through to the reporting. But once you have this as senior management, you're in charge, you're capable, you're able to make adjustments to the program and projects as needed, because change is a certainty. Change is a certainty in these type of projects and programs. I'd like to discuss a little bit a concept that I've used over the years called the Python report. And I want you to think about this as looking at a report as if a pig was passing through a python, if you can make that visual leap in your mind. So it just shows the progress from left to right of your cases or your number of projects, whatever has to take place in your project to signify completion, that is moving from left to right, from step 1 all the way through to step Z, right? Everything is taking place and is complete. So we use these types of Python reports to understand the status of each of the projects and identify the problem areas and establish expectations from day to day to day of movement from left to right through the Python, if you will. And if you're not getting that, if you're seeing things slow down, then you start to drop down and do some problem solving in those areas. You might find out if this is a construction project, we're running out of stainless steel screws, and that's slowing up the crews out there. We have to address this quickly. Or we're not able to make contact with our homeowners as needed. What's the problem there? You drop down and you fix those problems, get everything running appropriately again, and in keeping with your KPIs, and then you move on to the next one. And you check this by having a report on a daily, or at least weekly basis, and then you have management stand-up meetings to review the progress of the Python report. Really helps with communications on projects, gets everyone on the same page, and can really speed the implementation of disaster recovery projects.
That makes perfect sense. I like that metaphor too, that visual analogy. So I know what the PMIS is doing now on a recovery program. I know what the PMO is doing with the PMIS. And I have a feeling, although they may be new abbreviations to some of our listeners, they're going to recognize the idea of an information management system. And they've probably heard of an Oracle or a competitor. Now, Mark, IAF offers something completely different than those off-the-shelf tools. And Ignatius. Could you tell us a little more about Ignatius and why that low-code solution is so appropriate for these programs?
Definitely. Low code's a movement, like in the software development space, that allows for standing up systems through configuration instead of programming. And so that's been super helpful in terms of making software developers' lives easier. But it's also been helpful in improving the lives of the project managers as well. And there's a theory in project management, I'm sure Andy can speak to it at length, that it's called the project management triangle. And it basically says that when you're faced with optimizing cost, time, and functionality, you can only pick 2 of the 3. And so low code kind of disproves that theory in essence. It allows users and clients to have robust, cost-effective software at a fraction of the time. So Ignatius is a product that we developed at IAF to help the public sector develop these systems quickly and efficiently. And the idea behind it is that each system, or even though each project might have different scope, the technical challenges are really very similar from project to project. So you could have a wildfire out in California or a hurricane in Louisiana, and the reality is you're still going to need reports, and you're still going to need notifications and analytics. And so there's a lot of products out there, but public sector tends to have very specific pain points. So that's where how Ignatius was developed, with those challenges in mind. And so as far as how that compares to large systems, I tend to think about it as a young parent. When I'm faced with the challenge of going to a playground with children, I have 3 options of getting there. I have I can drive my car, I can take a stroller, I can walk, right? Your car is going to be similar to the old school PMIS and the old school conventional software. It's really difficult to get everybody loaded in, but once you're up and running, you're moving. But the risk there is you might not even leave the driveway. The complete opposite of that is walking, right? That would be like using a spreadsheet. Anyone can do it. You're up and running quickly. The risk there is you might not get to your destination, right? You could easily get lost. And so then you look for these hybrid solutions, and that's kind of the low-code, best-of-breed approach, where you have like a stroller, right? I can store some things, I can move a little quicker, I can get out the door fast. That's really what low-code is compared to all of the other kind of conventional systems or off the shelf. And so there really is no silver bullet, but on average, certain situations tend to lead themselves to certain solutions. So, right, if it's pouring down rain, you might need to take your car, and if there's a disaster that hits, you're probably going to want to use an agile low-code approach to setting up your PMIS.
Got it. So I've got pythons eating an elephant, and I'm taking my kids to the park so far. I'm on my way. All right. So no, but seriously, so at my low-code PMIS, I've got more scalability than a typical as-is system. I've probably maximized some of my funding because it's not going to cost me as much to launch. And certainly as my recovery program proceeds, it's going to be more easily tailored to my specific needs. So that makes perfect sense to me. Now, Andy, you're in the PMO, you're running the PMO, and you've worked specifically with IAF and with low-code systems on these programs. And I remember talking to you earlier a few months ago, and when we were talking about having Hill and IAF team for some of these recovery assignments, you said that having them on board would be a quote-unquote game changer for getting that program up and moving in the right direction. So what would IAF do to do this? What did you like about those low-code tools?
There's a couple of features of low-code application platform technology that I find appealing. Let me start with you're always going to have some type of grants management or PMIS system, etc. And it was coded in previous versions of technology, and it sort of is what it is. And so what I mean by that is you're going to get the functionality that's in the box, and if you want to customize it, you're talking about a whole other endeavor, right? And that's where the difficulty in disaster recovery projects starts, because nothing stays the same. Once you kick off a project in disaster recovery, it's going to be different than you or your stakeholders expect 30, 60, 90 days from the start. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, there's a lot of stakeholders. A lot of your original assumptions turn out to be incorrect. And a lot of change is also taking place through these disaster recovery projects and programs. So you have to be able to adapt to that. And that's where the IAF capability comes in. It enables you to say, hey, Mark, we started out with this, but now we need to have another report generated or another functionality, or we need to integrate data, et cetera, move it from one database to another, and apply even some logic to it. Can you help us? And Mark, I have, with this software capability to date, has never said no. He said, sure. And he's been able to get it back to me within days. And I don't mean, 100 days or 365 days. He gets it back to me in 10 or less days in many cases. And it's right. And I actually got interested in having more discussion with Mark about this, because I really didn't understand how he was able to do that. Because my original degree is in computer science, so I know something about technology. And he was able to just do amazing things in short periods of time, very inexpensively. And that's what goes back to this triangle. You're not supposed to be able to do that. In systems, it goes all the way back to Ben Franklin's printer triangle, where he says, pick two. You can have cost, speed, or quality, but you can't have all three. And it seemed with as I went to Marcus and said to do this, he was able to come back inexpensively, quickly, and it'd be perfect. And so that was my original interest in working with Mark and bringing that technology here to Hill. I think it's really worked miracles for us on our projects.
It's great to hear Vitella breaking the triangle of project management there. It's a great client. From my own curiosity, and let's keep this with you to start. If I'm an owner, say a public utility owner, even just a mayor, a stakeholder, why would I even consider anything other than low code? Why would I look at a traditional PMIS? Is it just because I'm familiar with a certain name? What is there any advantage to a conventional PMIS versus low code in your opinion? Andy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut to the chase on this. I think that in certain cases, people will be just more comfortable in picking some of the classic PMIS systems, and they will denote that it is a low risk decision to pick an Oracle or whatever PMIS system that you want to have as your choice and your sort of PMIS system of record. That's okay. Mark and I have talked about this a lot. That's okay because inevitably in that program, and as I said before, within 30, 69 days, change begins. And that's where the other systems hit a wall. It doesn't take long. But what's great about the system from IEF is it can work and coexist with those systems, pull data from them, do the hard work, and then throw it back into those systems for display or not, or actually just keep it in its own database. So the good thing about IEF Ignatius capability is that it's able to coexist or exist on its own. And that I find that very attractive as a program manager because I know the difficulty with customizing these big box software vendors and very, very expensive.
Got it. Mark, would you care to respond to that as well?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely something to be said about, those who prefer the familiar, right, and the known. But like Andy said, I think with low code, you have the option to complement or substitute. And so, the goal is really to always leverage existing systems wherever you can. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, that's the essence of efficiency. And so you don't want to reinvent the wheel or stop a process that's already working. But the benefits of low code can also be the curse, right? One of the benefits is it's not one size fits all, right? It's like a Swiss Army knife. You might be using the knife one day and the toothpick the next. The risk is the same, right? It's not one size fits all. And so just because everyone can do the programming doesn't mean that everybody should be doing it. And so things can get messy and out of hand very quickly. And that's really where, data governance, project management is still pretty relevant. And it's probably one of the reasons why, teenagers have learner's permits, right? We don't just throw them the keys when they turn 16. Bad things could happen. So, you want to have a partner like a Hill to make sure that these programs and the projects are running well. I think that's critical.
Got it. Now to get a little more granular, Mark, you've written extensively about how low-code solutions help maximize funding streams specifically. I know Hill is a member of the Disaster Recovery Coalition of America, and so many of DRCA's members are forward-thinking strategic partners who understand that working smarter is the best roadmap for grant reimbursement success. Now we're looking at billions of dollars soon to be available to public agencies across the U.S. through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I think a lot of people are missing this, which explicitly names resiliency as a key component, not just resiliency projects, but every infrastructure project should consider resiliency. So the goal for grantees that Hill and other DRCA members are going to support is going to be avoiding overlap from the Act and other funding services. sources, funding sources. Mark, you're an expert in this area. Can you explain exactly what that means and what our clients should be looking for?
Sure. Yeah. In grant management, there's basically something called duplication of benefits, and it says that no $1 can be paid for by any more than one grant. So if you have a grant that's going to say reimburse road costs, and then you have another one that would do roads and buildings, well, you want your road grant to pay for your roads. Because if you did it backwards, right, you might find yourself with some unreimbursed building costs. So that's the concept of minimizing the eligibility overlap to help you maximize the funding. And so, there's some serious accounting and policy challenges, right, that come with grant management, but a lot of this can be solved with some effective data management and really being able to track every dollar, who paid for it, what it paid for, who reimbursed it. And to do this, you really need to interface with a client's ERP or accounting system. And that's where low code comes in, because each client is going to have a different accounting system. They're going to have different budget structures, and to integrate effectively, you need flexibility, and you have to be able to accommodate for those types of differences.
Got it. Now, Andy, from the PMO perspective, what would it mean to you running that PMO and obviously to our clients to have a tool like that to maximize those grant dollars? What would it mean for the people on the ground trying to recover?
Well, this is a current hot topic within the disaster community, and I look at some of the timelines at which these disaster recovery projects have gone on before substantial progress is being felt by the affected citizens. What this means to me is you're going to speed up the recovery and the effects of the recovery on the affected citizens. And to me, that's our job. If you think about it, we are there to take the grant dollars and enable the society to recover as soon as possible. And that as soon as possible, read low code application platform into that. If you're not doing that, you're not doing it as soon as possible. You're elongating the recovery effort, and it's already too long in my mind. And so I think it's critical to the mission of disaster recovery to take advantage of this type and other technologies in order to speed the recovery process to the affected citizens.
So really, a PMO using the right PMIS system, probably a low-code system, that's going to put people back in their homes sooner, for example.
It definitely does. Mark and I both had this experience. It does.
I'd like to conclude here, and I'd like to learn, Mark and Andy, your thoughts on where we're headed in this disaster recovery space. Now, natural disasters, and as we're seeing today, man-made disasters, they're increasing in number and in intensity. The planet is warming, and not to be overly pessimistic, but it does seem, to me at least, that things can only get worse from here. That said, I see the projects that Hill and others are building around the world, and they increasingly include resilient features. I see the entire design and construction industry trying to get a handle on how to reduce their carbon footprint and leverage new tools and technologies to, as Andy said, deliver projects faster and better, and as Mark said, to do so as cost effectively as possible. So what do each of you think the coming years are going to bring to construction management and technology when it comes to disaster recovery? Andy, could you share your thoughts with us?
I can. So there's a large community of thought out there around disaster recovery that obviously the disasters are going to get bigger and badder as the years go on, right? The world has not quite decided that we are going to take all the action we need to cool the planet. So as long as we don't do that, you can reasonably expect the disasters to get worse and more frequent. That's driving a lot of stress within our industry, and we also have competing. I will just be plain and call them programs out there from the Infrastructure Act as an example. billions and billions, trillions actually, of dollars are going to be competing for construction talent, and the labor supply and the supply cost. And so we're going to be challenged with bringing in enough people, managing the projects, identifying the supply chain issues and resolving those. It's going to be a very sporty future for us in the disaster recovery market. And having, when you look at it, well, what are you going to do about that? Well, you got to look to innovation, you got to look to technology, and I believe that this is one of them that should be adopted within our industry, and one that Bill is proud to feature in our solutions with our clients.
Got it. Mark, I'd like to get your opinion on this as well. Could you share your thoughts on where we're headed in the disaster recovery space?
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, there's an unfortunate trend towards more disasters. So by their nature, they're chaotic, they're unpredictable. So anything we can do to create order and expedite a response is going to be a step in the right direction. I think we're going to see a shift from this kind of pre-planning to really just anticipating needs. We don't know what a disaster brings until it's there. It kind of reminds me of the old Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. We need to be able to be adaptive and to be responsive. And so I think we're going to see some consolidation in the recovery efforts through these PMOs just because of how efficient they are. And hopefully we'll see technology be one of the key drivers for that.
Thanks, Mark. So whatever your role in the recovery and resiliency project space, we hope you've learned something from this episode of Hill International's Insights and Expertise podcast. Today we spoke with Hill Vice President of Resiliency and Disaster Recovery, Andy Robinson, and IAF Consulting Managing Director, Mark Della Volpe. If you have questions for Andy or Mark, or would like to add to today's discussion, please drop us a line at the contact information on your screen, and we'll get back to you. Thanks for joining us. This has been Chris Miller with Hill International, where we are delivering the infrastructure of change.